The end of World War II and global shock. In 1945, the world witnessed the end of the deadliest conflict in human history, World War II. Over 60 million lives had been lost, cities were left in ruins, and entire nations were devastated. But as the guns fell silent, a new battle for power and survival began, one that would define the modern world. Europe lay in ashes. Cities like Berlin and Warsaw were leveled, leaving millions homeless. Factories were destroyed, transportation networks broken, and economies in complete collapse. According to United Nations refugee reports from 1946, over 11 million people were displaced in Europe alone. This was not just a humanitarian crisis, it was the beginning of a global transformation. In the East, Japan had been utterly devastated by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Cities were flattened, industry destroyed, and the population traumatized. Millions faced starvation, disease, and economic collapse. Even the victors, the United States and United Kingdom, were not untouched. The war had drained Britain's finances, leaving its empire in jeopardy, while the United States faced the challenge of transitioning from wartime production to peacetime economy. Part 2. Europe in ruins. Europe had been the center of global power for centuries. By 1945, that power was gone. Germany. Germany was divided into 4 zones controlled by the United States, United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The division was ideological. The Western zones embraced capitalism and democracy, while the East became a socialist state under Soviet influence. Millions were homeless, and the economy was shattered. By 1946, German industrial output had fallen to only 10% of pre-war levels, according to the Allied Control Council. France. France faced massive reconstruction challenges. Paris had survived relatively intact, but industrial regions in the north had been heavily bombed. Agricultural output dropped by over 25%, creating food shortages. The French National Institute of Statistics reported that unemployment in 1946 reached 14%, forcing urgent economic reforms. United Kingdom. Though victorious, the UK was financially exhausted. Wartime spending had drained national reserves, and debt had reached over 200% of GDP, according to the Bank of England. Maintaining the British Empire became increasingly difficult, leading to eventual decolonization movements across Asia and Africa. Italy. Italy's transition from fascism to democracy was turbulent. The country faced political instability, economic hardship, and social unrest. Between 1945 and 1948, strikes and protests were common as workers demanded better wages and living conditions. Eastern Europe. Eastern European countries such as Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia experienced immense devastation. Infrastructure destroyed, economies collapsed, and governments fell under Soviet influence. By 1947, Soviet economic reports indicated that Eastern Europe's industrial output had fallen by 60 to 70% compared to pre-war levels. Part 3. The Marshall Plan and Western Recovery. In 1947, the United States introduced the Marshall Plan, an unprecedented aid program for Western Europe. Over $13 billion, approximately $150 billion today, was allocated to rebuild infrastructure, stabilize economies, and revive industry. Countries like West Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands experienced rapid economic recovery. For example, West Germany's industrial output had returned to over 50% of pre-war levels by 1950, according to the OECD. The Marshall Plan also served a strategic purpose, preventing the spread of communism. Strengthened economies aligned with Western ideals became a buffer against Soviet influence. Historians like John Lewis Gaddis argue that this plan was the foundation of the modern European economic miracle.
The Cold War emerges. The ideological divide between the United States and Soviet Union created the Cold War, a conflict fought without direct large-scale battles between the superpowers, but through proxy wars, economic pressure, and political influence. Key developments: nuclear arms race. Both nations stockpiled weapons capable of total annihilation. Space race, beginning with the launch of satellites symbolizing technological supremacy. Proxy wars, conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and later in the Middle East. Propaganda campaigns, both sides sought global influence. The fear of nuclear war shaped politics and society for decades. Citizens in both the West and East lived under the constant threat of total destruction. Japan's transformation. After the atomic bombings and unconditional surrender, Japan faced devastation, cities destroyed, millions dead, and a crippled economy. Under U.S. occupation, a new constitution was drafted in 1947, renouncing war. Land reforms redistributed agricultural land. Industrial and educational reforms were implemented. By the 1960s, Japan had transformed into a major economic power, the Japanese economic miracle, illustrating how foreign supervision and domestic reforms could reshape a nation. China, civil war and communist victory. China, devastated by both Japanese occupation and internal conflict, descended into civil war. By 1949, the communist forces led by Mao Zedong defeated the nationalists. This victory established the People's Republic of China, shifted regional power dynamics in Asia, and created tensions with the United States and allies. China's civil war was a precursor to the ideological conflicts of the Cold War in Asia. Korea and Vietnam Cold War proxies. Korea. The Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. North Korea under communist rule, South Korea under U.S.-backed governance. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, became the first major proxy war of the Cold War, killing millions and leaving the peninsula divided to this day. Vietnam. In Southeast Asia, Vietnam's struggle against French colonial rule evolved into a Cold War conflict. The U.S. became involved to contain communism, eventually leading to the Vietnam War.
Decolonization and new nations. The war weakened European powers, accelerating decolonization. India and Pakistan. India gained independence in 1947 after decades of struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Pakistan was created as a separate nation, leading to mass migrations and communal violence. Africa and the Middle East. Colonial powers like France and Britain faced growing independence movements. By the 1950s and 1960s, dozens of nations in Africa and Asia gained sovereignty, reshaping global politics. Global institutions and the New World Order. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to prevent future conflicts. Alongside the UN, the World Bank and IMF were created to stabilize global economies. These institutions promoted international cooperation, provided financial assistance for reconstruction, became tools for ideological influence during the Cold War. Europe recovered, superpowers rose, and a new global hierarchy emerged. Who really won? In the aftermath of World War II, the United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. Europe lost dominance. Asia shifted with Japan's recovery and China's communist rise. Former colonies achieved independence, but the cost was immense. Millions of lives lost, societies destroyed, and political tensions that would last for decades. The winners were those who could rebuild, influence, and adapt. The losers were those whose infrastructure, economy, or political freedom was shattered. The world of 1945 was not the same as the world of 1939, and the decisions made in those critical years shaped the modern era, the borders, alliances, and conflicts we still see today.